You are listening to UpTalk with Sean Conahan. The gloves are off, and it's time to have a chat.
Hello, people, and welcome to episode 7 of the podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I would like to thank my sponsors, as always, Rest Ed Seminars, the Compass Rose Health and Wellness Center, Dan's Son Photography, and Life Shield. And you can check them out at my website, uptalkpodcast.com. Please give them a look as they are helping out the podcast, so I'd like to help them out as well. Today, we're going to have a chat with Bill Rusk, who is the Executive Director of Badge of Life Canada, as well as Stuart MacLean, who is the CEO of Workers' Compensation Board. Also, in this month's Clinically Speaking with Dr. McGee, Robin is going to talk to us about the signs that a loved one may be struggling with PTSD. So it's a good learning chat for sure. As always, I would like to warn everybody that there could be some trigger moments in the podcast, so if you have trigger issues, just to make sure you're ready for that and in a good mind space that you can get the most out of the podcast. So, let's get going. At this time, it is my great pleasure to introduce to everybody Bill Rusk. Bill is the Executive Director of Badge of Life Canada. How are you doing today, Bill?
I'm doing great, Sean. How are you?
I'm awesome, thanks, and I appreciate you coming on. I want to thank you for making some time for the podcast, and really interested to talk to you, so thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be asked, so thank you.
Awesome. So, Bill, maybe just to begin with, just let everybody know your history and your mental health journey.
I've been a police officer for I'm in my 30th year now, and I've policed with 2 different police services in the province of Ontario.
Oh wow!
I was shot in the line of duty on June 24th, 1990.
Wow!
And received gunshot wounds to my face, neck, shoulder, back, and right hand. And as a result of that incident, I only spent a short amount of time off of work, and I returned to work, and then I subsequently transferred employers to another police service, mainly the result of my shooting incident and post-traumatic stress, and
right.
And I didn't really understand what was going on and what was happening. I knew something was wrong and different, but I didn't really know. Like, nobody really could tell me what post-traumatic stress was, and took about from 1990 to 1993. I was subsequently diagnosed with a disability of percentage for my physical injuries, but I was also given a percentage for my post-traumatic stress.
Okay.
However, once again, I didn't really, nobody really could explain to me what exactly that even meant. I just trudged ahead and went ahead with my job and kind of stuffed everything and locked it down tight and kept on motoring ahead. And as the years went on, I've had some personal suffering as a result of that. I lost my first marriage and lost a lot of contact due to relocation.
Right. From
my 2 oldest children, and I was subsequently able to remarry and have 2 additional children. And as life went on, I started to become heavily involved in police association work, and I ended up getting involved with the Police Association of Ontario as a board of director, and during that time I sat on several committees, and I was part of the Taser working group, and I was also part of the WCIB PTSD working group, which was working on behind the scenes all the minutiae details for presumptive legislation in the province of Ontario.
Right, Bill. Sorry to interrupt. So when you were diagnosed with your PTSD, I assume you went through therapy for PTSD? Yes.
No.
You didn't? Okay. All right.
Unfortunately, I'm kind of an anomaly. WCB didn't provide me with any treatment whatsoever.
Really?
So,
okay.
I didn't. Not only did I really not understand what my diagnosis was, I didn't really have anybody that was treating me. So I just kind of I call it. Some people have addictions and different things. Mine was work.
Yeah.
I ended up becoming a canine officer, so I
okay. Yeah.
call it that was my self-medication. I was able to work I was 24/7 with my canine partner. I worked 2 dogs during my career, and looking back now with the armchair quarterback vision,
right.
That's kind of how I survived. Was even though I was back to work and doing the different things, I was able to find that niche with dogs and have a permanent partner that was a canine.
Wow, that's awesome. I know that's a whole different branch of therapy, is the whole animal therapy and dog therapy specifically. And even though you didn't go into it like that, it's neat that that you can look back and see that connection that you had with that animal and how that may have helped you on your way to healing.
Yes, it was significant. Like looking back, it was at the time I didn't really recognize it. Obviously, now looking back, right now I actually have my own service dog for mobility and post-traumatic stress. So I'm really cluing in now that it's helping my situation now in terms of being able to handle my dog and do all the stuff with them and all those kind of things. But the things that a dog can do for you. I mean, it's fantastic. He's now so in tune to me that when I have any nightmares or night terrors, he wakes me up prior to. I have very specific times that I'm triggered.
Yeah.
He'll actually engage me now and wake me up before I have that, because he can sense my change in my hormones and that.
That is so cool. Yeah.
Even though I'm waking up at those specific times, I'm not waking up in my nightmare, right? So then I go back to sleep. So it's that's just one example of what he can do.
Wow, that's awesome. Now how long have you had him?
Well, I've had him since he's 3 years old. I've had him since he was 8 weeks old. I selected him, but I didn't necessarily select him because at the time I didn't have my recurrence. So I hadn't really selected him I'd lost my last partner due to just old age, and I was kind of replacing him, and then everything kind of fell into place, and I was able to get him trained and certified, and so now we're dynamic dual.
Sorry, I know this is sort of off topic a little bit, but when you lost your first canine partner, that must have been quite traumatic in itself, even though it was due to old age. He was your partner. He was your, that must have been quite a traumatic experience for you as well. Yeah, that was, there was tons of, he was my final partner, and he was probably I had won a ton of police competition events and competing against, police departments from all over Canada and the States. And, wow.
And, he was just amazing. Like, he wasn't necessarily me. It was just, he was an amazing dog, and we had a great bond and relationship. And so, there was a lot of tears shed, when, we lost, him, and I wasn't necessarily in a rush to replace him, but things worked out, and thankfully, thank God they have worked out now, because this guy is tremendous for me. So.
Well, that's awesome, Bill. Thank you very much for sharing that. And then, so now we have this Badge of Life Canada that you're involved with. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, Badge of Life Canada has been involved, was established in 2010 by Peter Platt and Sid Gervell, both police officers with Ottawa Police Service.
Right.
It was primarily due to the fact that there wasn't really anything in place at the time for police and civilian personnel in Canada that were not RCMP, because the RCMP can tap into everything that the military provides through Veterans Affairs. So there's approximately 65 organizations now nationally that deal with the military and the RCMP.
Okay.
So that was kind of the nexus that drew Badge of Life Canada. And my wife, I'll maybe just back up one second.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
My current wife, we've been married for about 20 years now. She was a police officer as well, and she was involved in a serious shooting as a result of that shooting due to medical issues. The suspect passed away in correctional facility, and we had to go through special investigations unit investigation and coroner's inquest and police and department and police service act investigation. And so we were right now. I'm the only modern day police officer in Canada that's been shot in the line of duty, and no one has ever been arrested or identified for my shooting.
Oh, really?
And I've subsequently have post-traumatic stress, and I'm off with a recurrence of that post-traumatic stress. And my wife has left policing, and she was involved in a shooting and has severe chronic post-traumatic stress as well as a result. And so we're the only policing couple in all of Canada that both have been in serious shootings and both have kind of understand what post-traumatic stress is.
Wow, so, that's quite a unique dynamic in itself.
Yeah. So
yeah.
To answer your question about Badge of Life Canada, we had kind of been involved a little bit in the periphery, not a whole lot, just at the request of whenever Peter kind of needed us to do something. And last summer, approximately August, we were approached by Sid and Peter to kind of take over the reins of Badge of Life Canada, because they knew us and they knew the passion and we talk about legitimacy, right? And we have the legitimacy, hard won legitimacy, but legitimacy in terms of being able to walk the talk and
right.
So and that was because Peter's health is extremely poor, and he not only suffers from post-traumatic stress, but he's also has serious cancer issues, and he's battling that, and the diagnosis is not good. And Sid wasn't really in a position to kind of take over, the reins full time. So my wife and I talked about it for a little bit, and then we decided to take it on as a volunteer way, right? Because we're not, no one's paid, no paid positions or anything. And we've taken Badge of Life in a short amount of time. We've turned it from a small organization into quite a high profile organization now, with the assistance of many people across Canada, right? And through networking and contacts that we are developing every day, and contacts that I've developed over the years through the Police Association of Ontario and the Canadian Police Association and the chiefs and different things. So what Badge of Life is now, it's a peer-led national nonprofit volunteer organization. We're in the process of getting our charity status. We're committed to supporting police and corrections personnel who are dealing with psychological injuries suffered in the line of duty. And that's primarily diagnosed with operational stress injury, including post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, addictions, with access to counseling and suicide prevention counseling and information and group support programs. So our focus, as I said prior, was not to leave the RCMP out, but there's 252 police agencies in the country, and nobody's really covering those other 252 agencies, right?
Right, so, and knowing that RCMP did have resources at their disposal. Our kind of focus then is to support and
provide information to all sworn and civilian personnel. So that's for policing, that's communicators and records people and special constables and across the board. That's also active and retired members. That's covering First Nations police, municipal police, provincial police, which is Ontario, Quebec, and the RNC in Newfoundland.
Right.
Corrections personnel, because we've been kind of inundated since we've taken over from corrections personnel across the country wanting us to because they see what we're doing and nobody really was looking after them. There was kind of a fit there in terms of the law enforcement part. So we've added them into the mix. We haven't added in EMS and fire because our legitimacy isn't in that field, right? So I can come and talk to an EMS group or a fire group, or we have a conference on June 2nd, for example, that's going to have police, fire, military, family, different things there, and I can speak and have great legitimacy speaking there, but at the end of the day, I still can't say I know what it feels like to be a fireman or I know what it feels like to be a paramedic. So
that's very valid. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Organizationally, it's not that we are want to leave anybody behind, but
no,
that's legitimacy and integrity are very important to us. So that's.
Well, you have to maintain that integrity of your group, and I mean, I see where you're going with that, and you have to maintain that for sure.
So our website, which is badgeoflifecanada.org,
right,
has when you go on the home page, it actually has a map of Canada, and on that map of Canada, there's two small icons, a star and a pin, and when you click on those, that actually takes you to in each province. It lists all the crisis resources, and we have an extensive therapist listing now that we're building upon as well through networking, and those therapists are vetted for specifically being able to assist first responders, military people. So the purpose of that map of Canada can assist the public. It can assist fire, EMS. Right. It doesn't have to. It's totally open to the public, and it's not closed off. So we do fulfill that function of being able to do that. But by vetting those therapists have that training, and because not every therapist has specific training for first responders, right? So
that's fantastic. I mean, just that resource alone, to be able to click on your province and see what's available to you, that's wonderful. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, the biggest the stats show that if it takes longer than 30 seconds, if you're in crisis and you come onto our site, within 30 seconds you can find all the information that you need.
That's fantastic.
If you or your spouse are trying to find that information, and you can't find it, then that's our concern, is that bad things happen then, because you feel that there's nowhere to get that information, right?
That's true. Now, Bill, how have you found that you've been received provincially and federally with police organizations?
Well, we've been received fantastic.
Awesome.
We were just last month in Ottawa for most of the week, and during that we met with different parliamentarians and different things, and we also spoke at the Canadian Police Association, and they had us there. We had a small fundraiser, which was greatly received. We've had since then we've had tremendous contact from the East Coast and the West Coast, which is almost overwhelming us because we're volunteers and we're self-funded, and to date, basically, we've everything that you see on that website and everything that we do up until basically now has been all self-funded, and now we're at the point where we've outgrown the ability to self-fund, right?
So how can our listeners get involved? How can they get involved in this movement, this Badge of Life Canada?
Well, if people can go that have the internet access can go to badgeoflifecanada.org, and on there it basically on our homepage, on our About Us, they can check us out. That's a huge thing with us, is that we don't ask people just to blindly have faith in us. They need to check us out and see what we're all about, and who we support and who we are, our history. We have a board of directors. We have an advisory board that's made up of some of the best medical people in the country in terms of psychologists and different things. And we have Dr. Anna Baranowski, who's like nationally recognized. We have Dr. Beverly Buffard, who's a professor with York and University of Toronto. We have Dr. Kathy Keating and Dr. Jeff Morley from the West Coast in BC.
Right.
We have some senior police advisors, some chief of police now across the different parts of the country that are coming on board, because we also not only need grassroots, but we need senior management to be actively involved, right, to open doors for us.
Perfect. So, Bill, I know you mentioned the website. Is there any other way, social media wise, that we can connect with you?
On the website there is a donation ability to do online donations. There's also ability to contact us through the website and send us something directly. If everything is payable to Badge of Life Canada, nothing goes into. We have everything goes through the corporation that way. We have Facebook account for Badge of Life Canada. We have Twitter at Badge of Life Canada. We have Instagram. We have
wow. Okay, cool.
We have a LinkedIn account. We have a blog site that also goes out to and gets coverage from about 40 countries every week. We have a huge following worldwide. Even we have a huge following in Australia. We have a tremendous amount of hits every week on different articles we post and that's what we do. We post other people's stories. We post different articles that are on there. We post all kinds of different things that are on there. On top of that, we have all kinds of information and resources. It's just when people start to look through what we do offer, it's they wonder how we do it all, sort of, right, that way. And we have one of the things that we have coming up on June 2nd in Brampton, Ontario is our first conference. It's going to be a conference on surviving trauma and building resilience in the workplace.
Oh, excellent.
And people can go on the site and there's a linkage there on how to register for it. And we're in the process of kind of working on taking that conference and going across Canada slowly, doing different conferences in different provinces. But we want to utilize the some of the professionals from those provinces so that when we're done, we've left a networking method there for people in that particular province. Like, for example, Saskatchewan, they have some professionals from Saskatchewan that are still in the province that can assist them. Just today, we've been talking with some First Nation police services, and they're looking forward to us trying to make arrangements to go up, and because it's just as important. A lot of the time, our First Nation officers are totally forgotten about in the country, and they have a huge suicide issue and just a lot of things going on, and we're as committed to getting up, and even if we are only able to do something with 10 or 20 of them, to us that's as important as doing 1,000 people in Southern Ontario.
For sure. That's incredible. You're definitely well connected. And I'll make sure I post all the links I can that you just mentioned on my podcast website, UpTalkPodcast.com, so everybody can just go there and they can click on anything for Badge of Life Canada and be able to get there quickly. That would be great. If you could say something to the first responders listening who may be struggling with PTSD right now and not really sure what to do or just are still in that dark place, what would you say to them?
Well, I'd tell them, first of all, that they're not alone, and that they simply need to, there's resources available to reach out to, and there's lots of good people out there to help you. That's one of the things that our website's all about, and we, with regards to all the people involved with Badge of Life Canada, we call it a pay it forward approach. Everyone,
perfect, yeah.
For example, I've been fighting in the province of Ontario for numerous years for presumptive legislation. Now we finally have it,
right?
But unfortunately, it's not going to help myself or my wife. But it's going to help all the people that come behind me, right? And so I don't get upset about the fact that those people are better off than I am. I'm actually very thankful and look in the mirror and say I was able to contribute a little bit to making, even though my life has worn it, I've contributed to allow the people coming behind me to be able to get the assistance they need so that they can remain productive members of their organizations. Because the majority of the people that I know over almost 30 years of policing, that's what they want to do. They want to be productive members. They don't want to be broken toys that are discarded by their organization. They want to be able to return to work, and for the most part, most members, should be able to return to work within the proper context, depending on their the circumstances of their situation.
Absolutely. I mean, and from what I've heard, you've done more than just a little bit. That's for sure. I want to personally thank you, Bill, and your wife, and Sid and Peter for what you guys have done, and for waving the flag for PTSD for law enforcement officers, from everywhere and all walks of life and all sorts of departments, whether it be, like you said, First Nations to, your provincial departments as well. Not leaving anybody behind is the main thing. And I appreciate your focus, like you were talking about, your focus on law enforcement and maintaining the integrity of your group. And I think that's important. We all need to take care of each other collectively, but we also need specific experience groups that we can talk to that have, specific experiences that we're used to. And I definitely appreciate what you were talking about there, Bill. And I just want to thank you so much for making time for the podcast. And I think what you're doing is awesome. And I just want you to know that if you ever need anything, just let us know. And I'd love to have you on again. Would help you any way we can, for sure.
That's awesome, Sean. And one final thing I'll add there is that's another reason of Bachelor Life Canada is what you were just summing up at the end there is we don't believe in a cookie cutter approach. So we believe in the use of therapists and the different things that professional therapists can provide, but we also support alternatives like equine and like we talked about at the Can't Start. We're also big on meditation, yoga, and different things, because there really isn't a cookie cutter approach to solving post-traumatic stress. If there was, no one would have it, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
That's stuff, and that cookie cutter approach organizationally to us for the coverage towards policing corrections is that we're true to ourselves, and we're not trying to be everything to everybody, right? And because that's kind of unrealistic. So
no, that's very well said, Bill. I just want to leave you with be safe and all the best to you and yours, and we will definitely have you on again.
Okay, very very much appreciated. Keep up the great work, Sean. We're really impressed with your podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks. All right, guys. I want to take a second to tell you about two events that are coming up in June in Nova Scotia that are helping raise money towards PTSD. The first one is the Walk for PTSD, which is taking place in Halifax on June 11th between 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. at the South Commons Triangle in Halifax. You can find out more about this very important event at www.walkforptsd.ca. So please check that out. Another event that's going on is the Help Our Heroes Charity Golf Tournament, which takes place Friday, June 17th. It's the second annual tournament, and it supports corrections, EHS, fire, police, RCMP, and military personnel. All proceeds from the event are donated to the Tema Contra Memorial Trust. For only $110 per golfer, you're going to get a green fee, which is going to be a scramble round of golf, a power cart, a barbecue lunch, a bottle of water, draft beer, and one bounce back green fee to Granite Springs to use at another time. So that is an awesome deal for a great charity event. So please check them out at www.helpourheroes.ca. At this time, I would like to introduce everybody to my next guest. He is the CEO of the Workers' Compensation Board of Nova Scotia. I would like to welcome Stuart MacLean to the podcast. How are you today, Stuart?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, it's my pleasure for sure. first I thought maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you progressed to this position that you have now, what your background is.
Well, Sean, I actually have been working in the Workers' Compensation Board of Nova Scotia for 30 years.
Oh, wow.
So I'm sort of the person who comes in and, worked at a lot of different positions in a lot of different leadership roles over the years, and then progressed to the point that I became CEO about 5 years ago. But I've been part of the leadership here at the Workers' Compensation Board for many years, and I've seen a lot of change, and a lot of different things are going on that are very positive, I believe, and certainly there's still lots and lots of challenges, and it's a very interesting place to work for sure.
I bet.
And it's one of the things that I get excited to come to work every day, because I really believe our teams are making a difference, and we're trying to create the conditions for success so that we can have a sustainable future around health and safety in Nova Scotia that's a little different than our past.
Well, that's
very important to me. So.
Well, no, that's awesome, Stuart. I know when I started in the whole workforce way of life, I knew workers' compensation was there, but I always thought of it as if you hurt yourself physically, that was I think that's what everybody sort of thinks when you get into it. But now, of course, more and more we're hearing about mental illness and mental injuries that people may or may not have known that could also be a WCB issue. And I mean, how have you seen it over the years as far as the progression of whether it's PTSD versus physical or general mental illness versus physical injuries as far as the claims go over the years?
Yeah, well, that's a really great question, and there's absolutely no doubt about it. We're talking a lot more about mental health. We're talking a lot more even about other things in the system. For example, there's a big conversation about violence in the workplace, in healthcare that's been, in the press and on the radio in recent weeks. And certainly, the more you delve into things, I think things sometimes, injuries, they look on the surface like they're very simple, but they're actually very complex, as you know all too well.
Right.
And, mental health, we call it the biopsychosocial model, which is kind of a fancy way of saying that it's about your personal physical being, but it's also about your social connection and also about your mental health in terms of how those things can provide complications. And obviously, PTSD, which we're here to talk about today, is one of those things that it's probably been happening to people for a long, long time, but people didn't really think about it as I can't function, therefore, I'm having difficulty, and it's got to do with something that happened at work. I will say that in workers' compensation, the injuries that we're concerned about obviously are those that arise out of in the course of the employment.
Right.
We don't draw a distinction between whether it's a physical injury or a mental injury. In fact, I think the big thing is the conversation's changing around mental health. We're trying to get rid of the stigmas of people being able to talk about, you don't want to be tough and just say I can do this, when a lot of times it's really had an impact on people's lives. And, whether it's physical or whether it's mental, these things at the extreme, the extreme physical injury is a fatality. The extreme mental injury is PTSD. We're just as concerned about any of those circumstances and trying to prevent them.
Absolutely. As far as, if someone believes, normally this is a collaborative effort because you're employed and your employer and you collaborate to start the injury claim. How does that, right from that time zero, how does that work? When
we have an injury take place, there's a requirement for the injury to be reported by the injured worker and the employer and the physician. There's timing around each of those reports. The key thing around PTSD claims, it's not when the incident takes place.
Okay.
What we really deal with, you have a year from the time of the diagnosis. Right. So, for example, in order to get benefits for PTSD, you need to have a diagnosis from either a psychiatrist or a psychologist. So of PTSD, so we know that it actually exists, because you obviously need evidence that there's something that's happened and this worker is dealing with a circumstance that's serious.
Right.
So you have basically 12 months from that date when you get the diagnosis. So I know it's been misunderstood that it's a year from when you might have gotten sick or some of the things that happened.
A good example of that. A good example of that, Stuart, is the Swiss Air incident. So a lot of people felt that because they didn't claim within a year of Swiss Air occurring that they couldn't. But actually, I mean, people are just now getting diagnosed with PTSD that could be traced back to Swiss Air. So they need to know that, they are totally able to start a claim as long as you say it's 1 year from diagnosis.
That's correct.
Perfect. Okay.
That's correct. And certainly we feel for anybody who's been exposed to these types of things, first responders and paramedics, firefighters, these people are the bravest in our population, and they're the ones who are faced with dealing with things that no one should ever have to deal with. And, certainly when things go wrong, we have to be there to try to help.
Absolutely. No, we appreciate that. So the scenario I'd like to ask you about is this, because normally, of course, it's a collaborative effort with your employer and you with this claim. Now, what happens when you're no longer employed at the company? So, I mean, and I don't mind if all my listeners know my story. So my story is when I asked for help, the next meeting I had was when my employment was being terminated and all my benefits were gone. So I'm no longer employed by that employer, but I can still start a claim. You know what I mean? That's still eligible to start a claim, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, you can file a claim for when you were working, when you had your incident that caused the PTSD. That would meet the definition of a right of the course of employment.
Okay.
So therefore, your claim would be considered by the physicians and the case managers to determine whether benefits would be payable.
Now, do you find is it more in those circumstances? I can imagine it gets a little complicated and a little bit more as far as the timelines might get spread out because of the fact that you may be in a situation where your employer and you don't necessarily agree on the circumstances are surrounding your claim, and that may get complicated for your agents to try to sort through all of that.
Well, I think anytime in case management, every case is independently adjudicated. Yeah. We have professionals that deal with, was there an injury? What's the wages? How much are they entitled to? Because basically the Workers' Compensation Act defines the product and how we pay benefits. And for example, if it's 75% of net for X number of weeks and then it goes to 85% of net, those things are all laid out in policy and in the legislation.
Right.
So whether I think it's not as relevant whether an employer agrees. I think it's because the employer is not actually adjudicating the claim. The decision maker is is a caseworker who works for us. They'd have to take all of the evidence that they have, and I think if they have stories that are saying two different things, they've got to try to sort to the truth. And that's but in terms of the cases we see in PTSD, I think it would be a very rare circumstance where we would see someone saying that the person wasn't exposed to something traumatic, because the definition of traumatic is really to the individual as well, because right. PTSD comes in many different forms. Sometimes it happens because of a big incident where you come upon a family on a roadside, or there's a prison riot, or something big happens.
Right.
But sometimes it can be, a whole bunch of things happen. It didn't bother you last time. It didn't bother the time before, but then this time it does. And, so these things have to be looked at and adjudicated on a case-by-case basis.
No, absolutely. That makes total sense. So is there a goal as far as when you start a claim to when you would like to have a decision? Is there a benchmark that WCB has for certain types of claims?
Well, that's a difficult question, because every claim is different.
Right.
And we have things to try to encourage. Like, for example, there's fines in the system for employers to report the information.
Oh, really?
We need a complete. So once the injured worker initiates the claim,
okay,
then there's a period in time that they have to get the forms in. So we're trying to encourage all of that to get the complete picture so we can make a decision.
Right.
Most of the time, we don't want an interruption in benefits for someone. So if they have to stop working, we're trying to make sure that they continue to receive wage loss benefits if wage loss benefits are due.
Right.
And similarly, we want to make sure that we can approve the medical aid or any kind of support, because in workers' compensation, we pay lost wages, but we also pay the doctor, a nurse, any kind of treatments that people are receiving, whether it's physiotherapy or a psychologist. So in order to get that treatment done, we're looking for the information not just from the injured worker, but also from the employer and also from the physician.
Right. Yeah. Those things.
One of the challenges in the system, and I don't think it's any different for a physical injury or a mental injury.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I know I mean, I just started my claim in the last couple of weeks, and I know that my representative for you guys has been excellent. She's been very communicative as far as getting back to me the information she needs, and getting, letting me know that she has the information. It's been really good as far as feeling like I haven't been sort of dropped. I always feel like I'm in the loop, and that's excellent. So I just wanted to commend you guys on that.
That's good to hear. That's great.
So the big issue, or one of the biggest issues that we hear about in the news now all the time, is presumptive benefits. So we know that a few provinces have come on board with presumptive benefits as far as Manitoba and Alberta and Ontario. I know that it's in the works in New Brunswick. They're trying to work through that. What are your views on presumptive benefits?
Well, first of all, I guess I'd say that our product, or the things we can pay and we can't pay for, or who's in and who's out,
right,
those things are defined by our legislation and our regulations. So that's really
right.
The government. I know Minister Regan and Minister Glavine have been previously on your show.
Yes.
And you've asked those questions, so I know you have some idea what the government thinks about it. But I will say this. We, in Nova Scotia today, it's not mandatory for police departments, fire departments, and most first responders to actually have coverage with workers' compensation.
Okay.
So as a rule, if someone says to you, I don't qualify for workers' comp, I can't get workers' comp benefits, it doesn't mean that our case manager has said they can't get it. It could just possibly be
right because
that police department actually doesn't cover their workers.
It's just not available. Right.
Right, because it's the municipality's made a decision to get private insurance versus workers' compensation.
Gotcha.
I mean, the thing that workers' comp offers that others don't is that there's a bar from being sued by the injured worker to sue the employer, and that's something that one of the reasons why organizations get covered. But the bottom line is there's big organizations in this province, and some of the bigger police departments and fire departments which have chosen a different route. So while PTSD is something that we're all very concerned about, and we're talking about the road to mental readiness, and I know you were there. I got to meet you when we heard Chief Blay speak about his personal experience, which I thought was extremely interesting.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this conversation is really important as it develops. If we don't cover a lot of the people, then the role for workers' compensation is not as big as it could be in terms of providing the support and that type of thing. I do know when you talk about presumptive, as I know in the past we've talked about, there's about 26 claims last year that were filed for in workers' comp, and where we have a PTSD diagnosis and it arose out of the course of the employment, benefits are paid. So I think what they're trying to get to with presumptive clauses, if you have a system that's actually not approving the claims for the PTSD, or there's, presumptive basically means that if you work for, let's say, for example, if you work for a fire department, and then it's assumed that if you develop PTSD, if you work for 10 years as a PTSD responder, or whatever the rules would be, that you would be entitled to benefits. What we basically look at is if the person is working for a fire department, and we all know that firemen, paramedics, police are constantly they're exposed to very difficult circumstances around the people, whether it's an injury or an accident, or whether it's about having to go to a scene where there's young people involved. And,
right.
And police, they put their life on the line every day when they go into these different circumstances where they're asked to respond to violence and all the other things that they deal with. The nature of the work, there's going to be a high preponderance of people who are susceptible to mental health issues, and PTSD is real, and we have to recognize that. And so when I looked at the statistics for this, I was actually surprised at how low the number is. When you think about the context of it all, we have 6,000 time loss injuries on an annual basis.
Okay.
And we have 26 PTSD claims that were applied for. So when you start to look at that, you think about the numbers, and there was a few of them that were about other things. They weren't about the work. That wasn't where it came from. Some of them just dropped it after they applied and they didn't follow through. But, so the numbers are not very, they're not big numbers. Now, I got to tell you, I believe that every injury is preventable. I believe that if you do the right things and try to create the conditions and the road to mental readiness and some of the different things that are coming forward, they can help people, because I think talking about it, and there's lots of things that we know that help create the conditions for successful workers. But there's no question that there are extreme circumstances that people go through. And, Chief Blay talked about his experience in Haiti with the earthquakes and losing friends. And these things are not things that the average person goes through. These are extreme circumstances. And, we'd love to have benefits for these people, but I think that's a choice that the fire departments and the police departments have to make in terms of what coverage they provide. I would hope that the private providers are providing similar compensation for the workers, because these claims are important. People need to heal, and we need to find the right support mechanisms. Because from my perspective, the workers' compensation system is there for the injured worker. The employers need protection for their workforce. They need support when people get hurt. But ultimately, the system is there for people when they have a trouble to try to get them back, because the most important thing is their families and their lives, and that you don't want people having those things change dramatically.
No, that's for sure.
We're going to do whatever we can to help that.
Absolutely. You mentioned last year you had 20. Was it last year you had 26?
We had 26. That's correct.
And are the numbers this year showing that it may be more this year, or are they on track?
I haven't seen statistics for 2006 as of yet.
Yep.
That's something that I haven't. I'm just looking back. There's actually 23 PTSD-related claims from first responders.
Okay.
And there were 16 of those were approved. There were a couple of them that are still pending, that they're in the process of the adjudication. And there was a couple that basically pulled out. So, there's a number of them. So I guess the bottom line, what I'm trying to say is that when we have clear evidence this is a diagnosis for PTSD, the person's in these roles that we know are highly susceptible to it.
Right.
Those circumstances, those claims are being paid. So I don't think the presumptum is as big an issue as to making sure people have coverage.
You explained that really well. I'm happy to hear that, and it sorted things out for me as well. I'm sure our listeners will feel the same. Is there anything else that you think that we need to know about workers' compensation that maybe you think we don't, or that we're misinformed about?
Well, I think that there's a lot of progress that's gone on. As I mentioned earlier, we're down about 35% in the number of injuries that we see require someone to lose time from work. So to me, that's a signal that the things we're doing as a system are doing better than we used to.
That's great, yeah.
But having said that, as long as we have one fatality, as long as we have one worker getting PTSD, I don't think we can rest. And we have to find ways to try to create these serious circumstances where the work is very dangerous. We have to find ways to mitigate the risk. And that means all those things that I think you're very aware of, which is about talking about it, which is providing support for it, which is, having a brochure that basically says, how do you actually get help? What is PTSD? How do I qualify for compensation? And what can I do? We believe talking to loved ones is important. We believe talking to the doctor, talking to the employer. If you think you have it, you should start to talk about it, because oftentimes people suffer in silence with this.
Right.
And because there's a stigma. I'm a big and tough guy, or I'm a big and tough girl, and I don't really worry about. I'm worried that people are going to think I'm weak, or that this is something, because we're taught to just sort of, suck it up.
Yes. And
this is not something you can physically see. Somebody gets their hand caught in a machine, it's a physical injury. You can deal with that.
Right.
This is something that it's harder to see. And oftentimes, because there's varying degrees of it, people, this is something, as you talked about trigger points earlier, or maybe it was something that I read or listening to the podcast you had with Minister Regan and Minister Levine. But, what's going to trigger it? No one knows when it's going to happen. No one knows how it's going to happen or what it's going to look like.
Right.
We just know that has an impact on these workers, and it's very difficult for them to deal with it. So understanding what's happening to you, that it's okay to feel nervous, on edge, irritable, that, these things are part of it, and that you have to find a way to deal with it when it happens to you, because it's not something that nobody wants post-traumatic stress disorder. That's pretty clear. So, how do we do our best? How do we make sure that these injured workers are getting the support they need? And in advance, how do we actually create and understanding, or a way for people to process the things that are happening in their workplace for people who are dealing with these things on a daily basis. And I think that's what Chief Clays talked about. Is right from day one, he talked about talking to his workers. He talked about new recruits. He says, what we do, the new recruits come in, he talks to them about what they're going to see and how it's going to work and how they're going to feel and how important it is for them to speak up about it if something is taking place. I'm not an expert in PTSD, Sean. You probably know a lot more about it than I do. I mean, I know you do. And, but what we do know as a system, someone who's a CEO in the system, I do know that it does cost a lot of money for claims. Yeah. These types of claims can be very significant on people. The impact on the worker and their families is extremely significant. And what we're trying to do is the best thing we can do to try to get them back to normal life and find a way for them to cope with the things that have happened to them. And that's no different. And that's where you really see the parallels to any kind of a serious injury. I mean, look at the fatalities that we suffer in this problem. For example, in fishing, where they continue to happen. And, the families and the communities are just devastated every time this happens, yet we haven't been able to figure out how to make it completely safe yet. And I think that's the same with first responders, with firefighters and paramedics. The nature of the work is such that we need new thinking. We need to have conversations. And I applaud, safety services in their conference and having so much content on this topic. And I can tell you, I'm executive sponsor for a national conversation around injury prevention, and we're talking about it there as well in the next month.
Okay.
We're talking about this and so what's the best practice? Like, for example, right from Vancouver right to Newfoundland, what are people doing? What's working? And how do we actually learn from each other and bring best practice back to our province? And that's important for us too as leaders in the system.
Absolutely. This has been fantastic. I mean, I know I had a lot of misconceptions going in. I assume that our listeners did as well. And WCB was sort of this shapeless entity that we knew was out there, but really, I mean, for me, didn't really know what it did or how it does it, what's available and what's not. I really didn't know too much about it. But, through this conversation with you and knowing that, these things are in the forefront of your mind and knowing what your passion is and the commitment you have to your job and the fact that you still enjoy your job means a lot as well. That means that you're engaged on a daily basis, and that's important to the people that, that are putting claims in. I just want to thank you very much, Stuart, for taking the time to talk to me.
Okay, great. Sean, it's been my pleasure.
My pleasure as well. And all the best. But also, Stuart, if anything, if there's anything in the future that changes with WCB, or if you see any opportunity that you'd like to come back on and tell us about something new, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, I appreciate the offer, Sean. Thank you.
And now, it's time for Clinically Speaking with Dr. McGee.
All right, Robin, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for joining us again. Today, I was wondering if you could talk to us about, because often our families suffer a lot while we try to figure out what's going on in our own head. So I'm wondering if you could talk to us about signs, for loved ones that someone may be struggling with PTSD.
There are many, so there's two ways of talking about this. One is talking about it, the family member who is concerned for someone who does not have a diagnosis and what they might think about to sort of help maybe appreciate that the PTSD is what might be going on. Cool. And then there's help for those who actually do have diagnoses, because a diagnosis can be very, very, very helpful for family members in trying to make sense of what it is they've been living with. So the number, it's kind of the kinds of things that are, there's things that are PTSD symptoms that are kind of out there, like irritability and one often common one is trouble sleeping and significant trouble sleeping and even trouble while asleep. So what spouses of people with PTSD often describe is that the spouse is thrashing about in their sleep, sometimes crying out as they're having nightmares, or even if they're not having nightmares, sometimes sleep is very, 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 very restless, remarkably restless, more restless than the spouse remembers prior to an unsettling event.
That must be hard to differentiate, Robin, because I know a lot of first responders who do it as a career are shift workers, so we already don't sleep well.
Exactly.
And not now, of course, not the thrashing about maybe, but we already don't sleep well, so we're irritable. We're irritable a lot. Normally.
Yeah, that's right. And so
it must be, it's pretty hard to...
Well, this irritability would be a bit more specific. So it's, I can't stand the sound of that blender. It's triggered by a specific, it's more, as we say, it's more brought about by things that act as reminders to the traumatic event, a certain location, driving the car past a certain place, things like that can really, so that's if the loved one notices a pattern. Gee, every time we drive by the airport, there's a fit there, then that's sort of, I wonder what's going on. The other thing though, there's often what many spouses will talk about is that they notice a numbness or an avoidance in their partner. So they see their partner sort of spacing out a lot. Yeah. And so staring out the window or just staring at the floor, staring into space for long periods of time while they are off reliving something or trying to struggle through something. Many people also talk about having noticing their spouse has an exaggerated startle response. Okay. So if they come up behind their spouse at the kitchen, the spouse is doing the dishes, the one comes up behind the other, and the one doing the dishes jumps, what were you doing? You came out, just stop sneaking up on me. And really, it's, don't we usually share the kitchen space?
Right.
So hypersensitivity to being easily startled is another consideration.
Okay.
Having to do with sort of the hyperarousal or being, unusually vigilant, and even at a sort of sensory level. But, spouses will say, I noticed them withdrawing from things that they previously enjoyed. So they won't go down to the Legion anymore. They won't walk the dog on the dikes the way they did, or because the dikes were where that bad thing happened, or whatever. So they notice a specific avoidance pattern that's related to the troubling situation.
That must be a big one, this whole avoidance and the whole disengagement from family, because I don't know what the numbers are, but I can assume that the divorce rate amongst first responders is quite high related to to non-first responders, only because I've seen it in my career.
Yes.
Astounding number of divorces, and probably one of the biggest complaints from the spouse, the non-first responder spouse, would be that they're not engaged in family activities. They're not, they're just not there. They're not present. Mm-hmm. They're not present.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or even if they're present, they're not present because they can go to the child's birthday party, but instead of clapping when the baby, eats the cake, they're like, they're just staring out the window. And
making that assumption that that's because they don't want to be in the relationship, and really because they're battling. They're having battles in their head all day.
Exactly so. And so it takes a very special person to be married to a first responder. And, it takes someone who has that, can go, going back to what we talked about in a previous episode, they also have to have core values about this person. What they do is valuable. What they do deserves support. They really deserve, I need to cut them a lot of slack, for the kind of things that are going on. And also kind of, point out to them when their path seems to be taking a kind of destructive route. So if they're drinking too much, or they're, making choices that aren't good for the family, driving dangerously or whatever, then of course the spouses do that.
And I know that conversation is tricky, because even for me it was, and what I think first responders have to keep in mind is to have an open mind, that when your spouse comes to you, especially more than once, with a particular issue, whether it be, not being present or you're drinking a little bit too much, to not just blow them off as nagging you, or that it's not a normal irritability or a drinking issue, that maybe you should really take a second to step back and think about it,
mm-hmm.
And that's hard for us to do, because say, I'm fine, it's just, stop nagging me. Right.
But so that's true of all marriages. People are prone to, stop nagging me. But in first responder marriages, both sides have to have a lot of compassion for each other.
Yeah, very true.
That they both have to understand that they both are committed to this lifestyle because of the values, and that that is going to mean being extra supportive and extra sensitive to each other, and to give each other extra listening time, extra quarter around things. So
sure. So I mean, it's important for spouses of first responders to know, don't give up, don't back down because you get some, a little bit of pushback when you first start to bring up these things. You need to keep on it and make the person take a look, within themselves to make sure there isn't an issue, and to make sure, if they need to go to a doctor,
mm-hmm.
or to talk to somebody. Because we're talking life and death here. It's very important that
very important.
Yeah,
that's right. We sometimes there are situations where the first responder is saying, I'm fine, but they're clearly not. And
right.
that the spouse then is in the difficult position of, do they go to the doctor behind their back?
Right.
Do they, how do they get help for someone who's insisting they don't need it? And that's exceptionally difficult, and there really isn't an easy answer to that one, because it often takes sometimes a whole family's intervention, parents, brothers, children,
right.
To step in and say, we're doing an intervention here, we think you need help. So that's sometimes people need support for taking those first steps and speaking. How do they find the language to speak to the troubled first responders so that they can open up and feel supported as they move forward with treatment or whatever else they need to work through. Just going back to symptoms, I'll mention this too because it's an area that's not often talked about, but with some family marriages with first responders who have been with PTSD, there can be changes in the whole sexual dynamic of a relationship in that some first responders respond to their PTSD with a real loss of libido, because libido is one of the first things that can be lost when someone is like, I don't have any room for this in my life. I've got to be vigilant for danger every single second. In the same way, most of us aren't thinking about that when we're in a impending car accident. In the same way, when someone's constantly feeling under threat and misery, it's hard for that part of their life to flourish.
Right.
On the other hand, I've sometimes seen it go the other way, so that there's some responders respond to their traumas with hypersexuality, and that they're very, very, very looking for this because they want to kind of get lost in in sort of the oblivion of it constantly.
It's their drug almost.
It's their drug, exactly, and there can be addictions to porn and to other practices that which again there's a big range in what people consider normal or in terms of frequency or activity, but that can trouble a marriage though too, because if one person suddenly has this huge appetite and the other person doesn't, they'll be going. Then there's a hazardous ground there around being very, very unequal in that. In that domain. And I've had spouses say to me, I can't tolerate this degree of demand. I can't keep up with him. He wants this many, many times a day, and I cannot do that. I've got a house to run, I've got kids to raise, I've got all this. Right. And I've had other people come to me and say, I'm heartbroken because he never wants to even touch me, doesn't even look at me anymore. Right. So somehow finding that often comes out in the wash as people get therapy and get help. They normalize in that regard because they're not addicted anymore to it as an addiction, so that they can sort of go forward normally. And again, it's sort of like you were saying earlier, just about it all boils down to communication and dialogue, and people being sort of open about their needs and about about where they are and what they need going forward. Both sides being open.
That's the main thing. I mean, for me personally, and I see a lot of my friends like this as well. When we're at work or on a scene, we are the best communicators in the world. We're awesome. However, when we get inside our own four walls, our home, we suck, and we can't communicate the simplest of messages to our loved ones, and it can be really frustrating, that whole shift. But I see it a lot. For me it's like that. I learning every day to communicate a little bit better, but I definitely am terrible at it inside my own four walls.
Well, it can also be for people who are getting treatment for PTSD. That marital counseling can be a satellite of that or a part of that. So it is an individual work for the most part. But sometimes marriages were troubled even before the traumatic event, and so there's old patterns that need to get changed away from way back. And some things are created in the marriage because of the PTSD. And once PTSD resolves, those things resolve too. So, that is often something that can be a useful adjunct to a treatment is just helping a couple move through to those best practices around communication, being straight with each other, and being loving with each other through a tough time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's excellent, Robin. Thank you for going through that with us. Do you have a story of hope for us today?
Yeah, I'll tell you. This is a little story. It's a little story, I guess. A responder came to me with concerns relating. His spouse was not happy. The spouse was not happy because of they felt that this person was demanding too much from them. Okay. In terms of sex, and also feeling that when they were asleep, that they were just like thrashing, and it was impossible to sleep with this person for two reasons. One, they wanted sex too much, and second was they were impossible to sleep with because they were super overactive as sleepers. They were like getting up and they were whacking them, and they were, waking up drenched in sweat and screaming and all of these things. So that it was just really, really, really hard on the marriage. And so the responder was looking for help relating. He said, I want to sleep peacefully because I want her to feel safe with me in the bed, and I want to kind of come to a place where we feel like we're on an even keel around our appetites. And so this was a case where, having worked through, this person naturally had been exposed to many really, truly terrible things, and having worked through all of that, it happened magically, almost like, I would say magic. It wasn't magic, it was neurological. Right. Once he'd resolved his reactivity to those terrible early experiences he'd had, his sleep thrashings just stopped. Wow. So his wife said, what are you doing in therapy? Whatever you're doing, it's working because you slept like a baby last night. And again, and again, and again, and again. So he just became a normal sleeper after years and years of being a puncher, hitter, screamer, thrasher as a sleeper. So his subconscious mind took the work that he was doing, translated it into the necessary feelings of sort of neurological safety that he could sleep soundly. And of course, that improved his well-being generally. And he and his wife worked it out around, how much they wanted to have sex and stuff like that worked out. That just naturally worked itself out once he had resolved his own psychological piece, because he wasn't driven all the time by, I have to do this because I don't want to think, I want to be on that kind of happy roller coaster instead of in reality or whatever. And, so they worked that out. So it happened as he worked on his individual issues. So it didn't actually require a marriage therapy piece because he worked it out as his nervous system normalized. All that came into normalcy for him and for his wife. Nice.
Well, it's certainly nice to know that can happen, because I know there's plenty of first responder couples and marriages that are probably going through that right now. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for talking to us about that, Robin. Again, it's a pleasure to have you. As always, be safe until we talk again, and we'll talk again soon.
That's great. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, me too.
Okay.
And there you have it. Another episode of the podcast is done. I hope you enjoyed the chats with Bill, Stuart, and Robin. I'd like to ask you again to check out the website, your one-click stop for everything UpTalk, where you can find links to episodes, pictures, links to guests, and other external links. So check that out if you get a chance. Also, however you listen to this podcast, if you could also subscribe to that medium, that'd be great. In other words, if you listen to it on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel. And if you listen to it on iTunes or another podcast program, if you could subscribe to the podcast and not just listen to an episode, just if you could subscribe to the podcast, that would be great. It helps out the podcast in getting noticed so we can build our audience. Thank you very much for doing that. Also leave some feedback and rate us if you wouldn't mind. That would be great. It's very important. Thank you for doing that. I'm not sure who's on deck next month. I do know that we're going to have Chief Jean-Michel Blais from the Halifax Regional Police. He will be on. I'm just trying to schedule who's also going to be on with him. But I'll let you know when I know. And until then, as always, be safe and take care of each other.
'Cause we ain't superheroes, we're just ordinary people trying to make a difference and the first on every scene.